What happens when leaders shift their focus from chasing happiness to embracing fulfillment? In this episode, Bernie Borges and I dive into the 5 pillars of leadership, the power of self-awareness, and how vulnerability can create stronger, more connected teams. Get ready to rethink leadership, starting with your own. Welcome to Rise to Lead, the podcast where heart-driven leaders come together to inspire and innovate. They will share actionable tips and insights that help you lead your team more successfully, advance your career or business as a leader, achieve greater impact, and experience deeper fulfillment. I'm your host, Regina Huber, guiding you through deep conversations about leadership that's rooted in service, freedom, and the desire to leave a positive mark on the world. Are you ready to create real change in your leadership, your career, your life? Join me for a complimentary Lead and Thrive session, a 60-minute one-on-one strategy session where we will discuss your specific needs and map out the next steps to lead yourself and others powerfully. Spots are limited, so don't wait. Visit transformyourperformance.com/Lead Thrive session to book your Lead and Thrive session today. Let's work together to make it happen. Welcome to the Rise to Lead podcast. I'm excited to introduce you to a relatively new connection of mine, Bernie Borges, the fulfillment architect from Florida. I hope it's warmer where you are than here.
Hi, Regina. Yes, as a matter of fact, we are having a warm spell. It's been in the 70s and 80s, and that's Fahrenheit. And then it's supposed to get back into the 40s, again, Fahrenheit here in the next couple of days.
Yeah, that's pretty cold for Florida, 40s.
Yes, it is. It is. But that's
Yeah,
typical in the winter. We get,
yeah.
the roller coaster of the temperatures, 70s and 80s, and then gone up down to the 40s. And it just happens for about 3 months.
Okay, yes. I used to live in Florida. Of course, Florida is big too. So I was in
Yes.
Miami Beach most of the time, a little bit different to the rest too. So Bernie, again, welcome to Rise to Lead. I'm curious to learn more about and from you here today. And I'm excited to share you with my audience. So let me quickly introduce you to our beloved listeners. Bernie Borges is the host of the Midlife Fulfilled podcast and the fulfillment architect at Thrive Media. Love that, fulfillment architect. Borges partners with leaders at organizations to design and implement tailored strategies that foster a more fulfilled and thriving multi-generational workforce. He helps leaders cultivate a balanced and meaningful work environment by developing a fulfillment-centric leadership approach focused on optimizing employees' 5 key pillars: health, fitness, career, relationships, and legacy. Leveraging his decades of marketing and communications experience, he leads workshops and helps facilitate effective strategies that help business leaders to optimize employee well-being and engagement, leading to increased productivity, higher retention, and career satisfaction. And that's what we all want. Bernie, tell us more about Bernie. What brought you to the place you are in today?
Yes. Well, Regina, like many of us, we have a story, right?
Mhm.
And so my story goes like this. Early in my career, my very first leadership role, way back in the mid to late 1980s, I was with a software company in California. And tragically, someone on my staff was killed in a domestic violence incident. And obviously, that was a very tragic, horrific event that just shook us. And so, what that did to me as the leader of that team was it made me aware at a fairly young age in my career of the need to lead my team, not just to get work done, because of course, you have to do that as a leader, but to do it with tremendous empathy and tremendous focus on their well-being, because all of us were grieving and just dealing with the emotion of that tragic incident. So what I like to say, Regina, is that forced me to become an unconscious competent. And what I mean is that I became an empathetic leader, but I was unconscious in my approach. I didn't have a specific method or approach to it. So fast forward 3+ decades of different career roles, mostly in marketing, and then the last 11 years as a podcaster. What all of that has in common, Regina, is communication. And then more recently, the last 3 years, focused on this world of midlife and multi-generational teams in the workplace, and then publishing a research report just a couple of months ago called Thriving in Midlife that I did with Udemy. I've learned a lot. I've gained a lot of data driven information about what makes people motivated, what gives them fulfillment, and what drives them in the workplace. So all of that has kind of led me to what I call being a conscious competent now. And by consciously approaching leadership through what I call the lens of those five key life pillars: health, fitness, career, relationships, and legacy. So I'll pause right there and give you a chance to ask any questions on that.
Yeah, so we have at least one parallel here. I was thrown pretty much into the cold water in my first leadership role, like completely, right? Because I had no relevant background. And you were faced with a very challenging situation that, that requires a lot of emotional intelligence at the same time, not just organizational and coordination talent that we all need as leaders, but a lot of emotional intelligence to handle this in a way that made sense, not just for you, but for the entire team, I imagine, right? So a difficult conversation, a difficult situation to deal with, challenging. So, um, and I'm glad that it inspired you to really look at this human side of leadership, because I believe that we could all benefit from leaders having a more human-centric and human-focused approach. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 1,000%, Regina. I don't think it's taught. And look, not that I have insight into what universities around the world are teaching,
Mhm.
but I certainly haven't come across it in my own research. And I've been doing research on this, that I don't think leadership is taught to be. I mean, there's certainly the concept of emotional intelligence. You just referenced that. I just don't know how much that is taught, especially at the graduate school level and business schools where, leadership is taught. And look, the fact is, we're all people. Every business on the planet is made up of people. And yes, of course, we have more and more AI in businesses, but until AI takes over the world and there's no people in business, which hopefully is not going to happen in my lifetime or your lifetime or my kids or grandkids' lifetime,
Mhm.
it's still all about people getting work done. So we have to, in fact, really lead people through that lens. And the reason that I call it the five pillars of life is because I believe that those five pillars really encompass all aspects of life. And so, what I say, Regina, is that a leader should start with self awareness of their own fulfillment journey across those five pillars: health, fitness, career, relationships, and legacy. And then when a leader has self awareness of their own fulfillment across each of those five pillars, then they have the potential to be able to lead their team with a level of empathy, because they recognize the simple fact that everyone on their team is on the same journey. The same journey. Those pillars apply to every human being without exception. So when leaders have that
Absolutely.
self-awareness, then they can lead with
Mhm.
empathy.
Right. With self-awareness, we can lead ourselves first, and all leadership hopefully starts with self. At
Yep.
least all sustainably effective and successful leadership, I would say. Very true. So, why did you talked to it a little bit already, right? So, what led you to where you are today? Why do you do leadership or teach and coach leadership in the way you do, in your very own way? So, what why did you decide to focus on fulfillment-centric leadership specifically?
Sure. So, Regina, I mentioned the Thriving in Midlife report that published in October of 2024. And it's a 157-page report. So it's a significant report. And one of the findings in the report is a really interesting one that I'll share in response to your question. And the question was, if you could only be happy or fulfilled, which would you choose? Now, in the survey that was a company that was used for the data for this report, we put a definition to fulfillment and we put a definition to happiness so that people can answer that question with clarity. So I'll share that with you and your listener.
Mm-hmm.
Happiness is an emotion and it can be fleeting, but it's an emotion. Fulfillment is generally associated with some kind of an achievement, whether it's big or small. And usually, in most cases, that achievement, whatever it is, big or small, is immutable. You can't take that away from me. If I have an achievement, then I have fulfillment from that. So with those definitions, 79.2% of the respondents chose fulfillment. 20.8 chose happiness. And that was huge. That was very, very eye-opening for me, Regina. Like that really gave me validation on what I had suspected and had been talking about anecdotally and now was backed up by data. And incidentally, we had 530 people respond to this survey. So that was our data pool. And it was multinational. And so that, Regina, was my motivation to say, okay, well, if 80, let's call it 80%, right? We'll just round it up to 80%, would rather be fulfilled over happy if they could only choose one, then why shouldn't leaders be cognizant of this? Why shouldn't leaders embrace this? And then you couple that with a data point that I think you know, because I think we already discussed it in a previous conversation. Gallup's 2024 State of Global Workplace report says that 77% of the global workforce is not engaged in their work. And the global cost in lost productivity is 8.9 trillion with a T in lost productivity. So that's a data point that just can't be ignored. And so if leaders are willing to do that self-awareness, as I mentioned, as you emphasize yourself, of their own fulfillment journey, and then lead through the lens of, I want to make sure that my team has resources available to them. So as a leader in any business setting, it's not my responsibility to manage their health, but I want to make sure they have resources available to them so that they can manage their health and that I show that I care about them managing their health. And the same is true of fitness, career, relationships, and legacy. It's not my responsibility as a leader to manage the details of fulfillment in those pillars, but I want to show that I care and I want to make sure that they know that there are resources that we make available to them. And to the extent that it's part of our conversation, absolutely, then they're going to see that I care. And I've got to do it with authenticity and not through some kind of a fake persona because people are too smart. They're going to see right through that. So that's why I believe leaders should be leading through that lens of fulfillment.
Absolutely. Yes. And of course, they also need to have the time available to take care of their health sometimes and of their fitness. So that's part of the care that you mentioned, I'm sure. Um, Now, when we look at the five pillars, I think some of them are pretty obvious to everybody, although they might also look different to everybody because, we all have our own imagination and our own understanding of what health means to us or what fitness means to us or career, whatever, right? So let's talk a little bit more about those five key pillars that you inspire leaders to focus on when it comes not just to themselves, but also their employees, right? So just to remind people again, health, fitness, career, relationships, and legacy. I think most people could agree that the first four are absolutely critical, right? I think we can quite unanimously agree on that, actually. But what about legacy? Why should someone care about the legacy they leave? And why should they care about their team's legacy?
Sure. So Legacy, as you know, can mean different things to different
Hmm.
people, and you've already stated that. So, the way that I put a definition to legacy is simply the impact that someone wants to have on fill in the blank, whatever that may be. It could be a cause, it could be a community, it could be a local nonprofit, it could be an individual, and it could be multiple, right? So I've got grandkids, so I want to have a positive impact on my grandkids, but that's not the only thing that I want to focus on in my legacy. So when, again, as a leader, if I recognize that people on my team have passions for a particular thing in their life, and I always use this example, and I've seen this example play out in real life many times. And that is someone who has a passion for animals, whether it be dogs or cats. And maybe they volunteer or they're on the board of a local charitable organization that, finds rehomes dogs or cats. And, it's a no kill kind of a scenario where every animal, the intention is to find a home for them, that kind of thing. So if an individual has that passion, then A, I'm going to acknowledge it. B, I'm going to, on occasion, not every day, of course, but on occasion, bring it up in conversation, like ask for recent examples or stories and how that's going, that kind of thing. I may learn that they might have an interest in, leaving next Wednesday at 3 p.m. in order to be able to do something associated with that. As long as we still get the work done we need to get done, on occasion, if as a leader I can accommodate that, well, it should be obvious, Regina, that if I'm enabling someone to have that impact on legacy, then they appreciate that. They respect that. And they can be more engaged, they can be more loyal, and they can stay longer in that job, meaning retention is improved. But back to your original question, it really is about
Mhm.
what's the impact you want to have, and then just encouraging people to embrace that and give them the opportunities to do it wherever they can.
Yeah. And there might be some people that say, "Look, it doesn't interest me what comes after me," or as we so elegantly say in French, "Après moi le déluge," right? So after me the flood. And but I think these people are very much the exception, right? And there's always somebody, but I think most people do care about their legacy. They just might understand something different than we understand when we hear legacy, right? So that's also really important to be curious and to find out what your team understands by legacy, maybe. Right. I believe that curiosity is one of the most important leadership traits that exist. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of people who may not even have given it a lot of thought. So, the example I just shared with you of an individual
Mhm.
who's passionate about a local animal shelter, they're involved. So, they're clearly they've given it some thought, but other people may not have given it a lot of thought. So, just by bringing it up, to your point about curiosity, asking people, so, what are some projects that either you're involved in or maybe you've considered getting involved in that can have an impact on somebody or a cause or something like that? And sometimes that conversation can kind of bring to the surface something that people have been thinking about, but they really haven't taken action. And now, if their leader is not only bringing it up, but encouraging them to explore those opportunities, again, all of that leads back to loyalty and retention and just productivity, getting work done because team members really feel valued and respected by their leader.
Yes, absolutely. I, you know, I think we all do our work better when we feel passionate about it. And this is exactly also related to legacy, right? If I am passionate about making that impact, making that difference, and having a certain result through that, then of course I will probably be more engaged. because it interests me much more. So, yes, it's all about building, I like to say about building happier and more engaged teams. So, the happy is also really important, but it all plays together, right? And life is a holistic phenomenon. So, we need to consider all these different pieces that make up a human's life, a person's life. As you said before, Bernie, it's people who make up a company, right? I like to say sometimes people are the heart of any organization. And hopefully it stays so, as you also mentioned earlier.
Hmm.
So um, so I think it's really, really important to find out that curiosity again, right? To find out, okay, what is everybody's perspective? What is everybody's passion? Really take the time also to have people share, whether it's in a group or one-on-one, and to get that information so that we can then also work with that as leaders.
Exactly. One of the things that I do in a workshop environment is I challenge leaders to come up with a strategy or a specific activity that is not work related. So, yes, you've got to schedule some time for it, but schedule an activity that's not work related where you invite people to talk about topics, again, not work related, that they're passionate about. And if you leave it fairly open ended, put some guardrails around it so it's safe for work as opposed to not safe for work. But invite people to talk about these topics. And again, using that same example, I probably should, share another example, but the one that I shared earlier about someone who's passionate about an animal shelter, or it might be, a homeless shelter, or it might be just an individual. It might be caring for a loved one who, needs care. So, but encouraging leaders, challenging leaders to come up with an activity where people can discuss it openly, willingly, of course, never force
Mhm.
anybody to do it. And the fascinating thing about that is that the conversations that happen go deep and people begin to see an aspect of someone's life that maybe they didn't see before simply because the opportunity wasn't there. They're too focused on the day to day work to even know about that aspect of someone's life. And when you enable those conversations to take place, you're bringing their humanity out in a work environment. And again, it just strengthens the connection among those people. And if these people are on a team, strengthening connections among the people is one of the best things you can do to get productivity where you want it to be, get loyalty where you want it to be, get retention where you want it to be, right? So it is altruistic, but there's a definite benefit to the business.
Absolutely. You could also potentially discover hidden talents that you didn't know your team had, right?
Great point.
Or
Yes,
talents, passions, and maybe talents that you've never asked them to use, but that could actually be helpful for the team or for your project. And you just
exactly.
have never asked them, and it's not written in their job description, right? And I think it's also why story sharing, I call it story sharing rather than storytelling, why that is so valuable in a team context. I've done this a few times also when I did like talks at a bank or in any other organization where I encouraged people in a certain way in that context, but to share a piece of their story. And they shared stories that the other people in the room had never heard about them. And usually what's also interesting is when people are encouraged and when they have the feeling that it's safe to do so in that environment, then even the shyest people come forward and share. That's really, really beautiful to see sometimes.
And they do that because they're passionate about that
Right.
topic.
Right.
Yes,
Yes, and when we talk about curiosity, I just want to say that again too, right? We're not talking about invasive curiosity. I think that goes without saying, but just
right.
in case, what we're talking about is that healthy curiosity, to call it something, or inquisitive curiosity that is really coming from a place of sincere interest and sincere care, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. and and also, and I know you've experienced this yourself, but HR is your friend in organizing those conversations and those activities, because you do want whatever guardrails need to be in place, and HR can again be your friend and provide those guardrails so that a leader stays within those guardrails and doesn't do anything to get in trouble.
Okay. Yeah. So I most of the time I worked in an organization where it all is organized a little bit differently, like in a big consulting firm. Yes, we did have HR, of course, but it wasn't so, especially in the smaller offices, maybe, under like, let's say under like 80 people or so. It was a little bit organized in a way that HR wasn't really so separate, right? And I actually found that helpful also because it was more natural to have those conversations without having to have an intermediary. So it depends on the organization, the company organization, and what works best for you, of course. But yes, absolutely, HR has that role for sure. Okay. Let's talk about something that I love to talk about: bold leadership, bold, heart-centered leadership. Let's talk about bold leadership a little bit more today. So, from your perspective, Bernie, what are some bold actions leaders can take to achieve new levels of fulfillment for themselves and for those they lead?
Well, I don't think that my answer is going to surprise you, because it is connected to the fulfillment-centric leadership framework
Mhm.
that I'm all about. And so, back to the early point that we made in our conversation, self-awareness, where when a leader is self-aware of their own fulfillment journey across those five pillars, what I also challenge leaders to do is to don't keep it to themselves. Share openly some aspects of that with their team. Now, of course, once again, as we've been discussing here, Regina, there has to be some decisions on what's going to be shared and not shared, because some things can be very, very personal and private.
Mhm.
But think about, from a leadership standpoint and from a boldness standpoint, what can a leader share about their own fulfillment journey in any of these five key life pillars? And when a leader is openly sharing what they choose to share, as long as, again, it's a safe for work
Mhm.
conversation, then what that says to the team is that that leader is being authentic. They're being vulnerable. They're sharing something about their own fulfillment journey, and it makes them more relatable and can potentially, again, strengthen that connection in this example between a leader and their team, because the leader is boldly and openly sharing something that, again, is potentially vulnerable about their own fulfillment journey, which again just shows that they're just as human as everybody on their team.
Yeah, it closes that gap between the leader and the rest of the team because we're sometimes leaders think they have to be perfect and not vulnerable in that sense, and that actually removes them from the team a little bit artificially, and that's not really what we want, because we also want to inspire our team to see that they can lead too. They can become leaders too. They don't have to have it all controlled right from the beginning. And we all started somewhere, right? Now, I want to go back a little bit to health, because that is a very, sorry, that's a very sensitive topic, especially in the last few years, where actually it is important to respect people's own decisions around their health and to not be invasive in that sense, right? So, what conversations do you have with leaders in that area?
Well, first of all, I define health as physical and mental.
Sure.
So this way it is holistic about an
Mhm.
individual, both physical health and mental health. And that's why I break fitness into its own pillar, even though fitness is obviously extremely connected to health.
Mhm.
But I make it its own pillar because it is significant enough to warrant its own pillar, especially as we are aging in life. We need fitness just to be functional and to contribute well to our health. But on the health topic and how do we have those conversations? It's again, it's being honest and open about the fact that for us to go to work every day, we have to be able to manage our health.
Mm-hmm.
So a simple example that I can give you is I remember when I was an unconscious competent, I didn't have, these five pillars, but I recall as a leader, I had someone on my team who just happened to mention, I didn't bring it up. He brought it up. He said something to the effect of, I haven't been to the dentist in 3 years. And I said, why? Just haven't gotten around to it, was his answer. And I said, well, look, I encourage you to do it. And I don't want you to be concerned about taking a couple of hours out of a day to go do it. I encourage you to do it. I didn't say you have to do it because it's not my place to say that.
Mm-hmm.
I encouraged him and he did.
Mm-hmm.
And afterwards, after the visit, he thanked me because he realized that he should have done it. It's not like he was in denial, but he didn't previously have that encouragement by someone, especially his boss, to take the time to go to the dentist. Now, that's a very simple example because other people might be struggling with mental health issues. So it's a matter of really providing resources. And I love the example you gave, Regina, of HR sort of being integrated and not being a siloed department. If HR is integrated, which I know is not going to be the case in every organization,
No.
but making those resources available and leaders talking about them and encouraging people to maximize their health in both physical and mental, and never prying, never getting into areas of conversation that are too personal and just not comfortable and not where they even should be from an HR standpoint, but proactively communicating the importance of managing your health, physical and mental, and the resources that are available, and yes, the time that it can take outside of work to go manage them. And if it takes a lot of time, then we'll sit down one-on-one and we'll have conversation and we'll figure out a plan to make it work. So all of that, you mentioned in the introduction my marketing and communications background.
Mm-hmm.
This is all communication. It's
Yeah.
all communication. And so I think sometimes that's overlooked in leadership, that it's just more about strategies, tactics, and then getting the work done. And I don't mean to insult any kind of a leadership practice or leaders that may be listening, but communicating these resources and the importance of those resources to be able to manage these aspects of our lives is an important aspect of leadership in general.
Completely agree. I completely agree. My voice just went out for a little bit. It's really cold and dry today here, so I apologize. And trying to stay hydrated here with my water. Now, yes, and you may not know this about me, but I studied quite a few holistic healing modalities. Okay, that's just also a personal interest of mine. So I studied, for example, body talk, but many others too. And they're all, of course, integrative, right? They are all, that's why they're called holistic. It's not just about, it's even about more than mental and physical. It's about really everything, every single aspect of who we are and how it's all connected. And just like you said, it's all connected. Every single aspect of our humanness is connected with the other. And if we could just also bring that into an organization, into the team, and say, hey, you know what, we have all these different elements of being human, and how do they play together? How can we respect them by being or by treating each other in a certain way, maybe we need to establish a few rules. Maybe that's not necessary because we do it more naturally. But whenever it doesn't work so naturally, why not establish a little bit of an infrastructure, so to speak, and some reminders for ourselves, right? Yes.
So the way that I'm interpreting what you're saying, Regina, is
Mhm.
I'll use the word process. So establish some
Yeah.
processes, but I also think in
Systems.
addition to the processes, so I like to say yes and. So
Mhm.
yes, and in addition to the processes,
Mhm.
establish the culture of
Mhm.
communication around these principles so that it's in the DNA of the team, ideally in the DNA of the company. And depending on the size of the company, that may not be possible. It may be very unique to specific teams where specific leaders are leading through this lens. But when it's in the culture, then I think those processes can really work well.
Absolutely. And it becomes more natural at the same time. We don't actually need the process and the system as much, but of course they're very helpful. Yes, absolutely. So, one other question I have for you, it's a little bit of a different question here. How would you say we can challenge conventional thinking in leadership so it makes sense? So, um, how can we do that also as leaders without alienating those who find comfort in the status quo?
So I think it comes back to everything that we have been discussing
Hmm.
from the very beginning of this conversation. And that is to really look at individuals on a team. So for leaders to view their team as real human beings holistically.
Hmm.
So again, I'm all about the five pillars. So I'm always going to come back to that. But even the five pillars aside, as a leader, if I'm looking at everyone on my team holistically as a human being, each of them comes to work from home, leaves work to go back home, has a weekend with whatever activities they may have on the weekend, and they have interests and they also have some struggles, some more than others. So, that holistic perspective, I think if leaders maintain that more intentionally, then I think they're going to set themselves up to lead differently and to lead more empathetically and I think lead more effectively and getting loyalty in return and getting engagement in return and getting better retention and just productivity in return.
Yes, that's what we always want. Higher
Exactly.
productivity, higher creativity, more innovation,
Yep.
higher engagement, all the good stuff. And this is how we can achieve it. And I think this is always important to consider how we can achieve it sustainably. Because one thing is to get to a great level of engagement for a day, and the other is to keep it high. Right. So for that, you then need the culture that you mentioned and your
Exactly.
five pillars.
Exactly. You read my mind. If the culture's there, then it can be sustained as long as the culture is maintained
Right.
intentionally.
Yes. And let's not forget that the leader, him or herself, is a part of the culture, is a
Absolutely.
representative of the culture. Right. Okay. So we talked about unconventional. I'm going to take this moment to quickly plug my new book because it is a leadership book. So, talking about unconventional, I just want to remind everybody of my new leadership book, the different leadership book, Living My Freaking Amazing Life. Create the life that's perfect for you anywhere in the world. It's a different leadership book, as I said before, a more unconventional way of writing about leadership with using my own stories, my own experiences that taught me about my own leadership of myself, my life, and of others. And you can get it on Amazon as Kindle or paperback. Thanks for allowing me to say that, Bernie.
Congratulations on your new book, Regina. It's very exciting.
Thank you so much. Currently translating it to Portuguese. Well, when this airs, it's already translated, so you can probably even already buy it in Portuguese. Okay, so well, this has been an awesome conversation, Bernie. Would you like to add anything that I have not brought up that absolutely must be said?
The only thing I'll add briefly is that everything we've discussed is not rocket science.
Mhm.
So anyone who's listening that's just thinking about, how to embrace what I call fulfillment-centric leadership, don't overcomplicate it. Begin with your own self-awareness. That'll equip you to have that same lens with your team, as we've discussed.
Mhm.
Just don't overcomplicate it because it isn't rocket science, but it's hugely powerful. And incidentally, Regina, I have been asked, well, Bernie, what you're suggesting sounds time consuming. And my response is what's even more time consuming is when you have high turnover and low productivity and you're trying to fix that. That's more time consuming.
Yes, absolutely aligned with what I like to say sometimes too, when especially also when people talk about, oh, story sharing or storytelling, that is such a waste of time. No, it's actually not, because you may gain a lot of time back as your team experiences less conflict potentially as a result and is more cohesive and collaborates more, right? Because they understand each other better. Okay. Well, where can people find you and your podcast? You also have a podcast.
Sure. So at Bernie Borges on everywhere. I'm most
Mhm.
active on LinkedIn, and Borges is Borges. My podcast is the Midlife Fulfilled podcast,
Mhm.
and the website is midlifefulfilled.com. And everything's there, including the Thriving in Midlife report that I mentioned earlier.
Okay, and thanks for correcting my pronunciation of your last name. I was actually going to ask you that. I'm going to be very honest, and then I forgot at the beginning. Because, of course, I lived in Latin America for a long time, so I had to say Borges.
You actually pronounced it correctly in the Latino world. You're
Right,
absolutely spot on.
right. Yes, like with mine, right? So in the US, I have people, or I ask people to say humor because it's just easier to understand for people. So we are adaptable.
Right.
Okay, also a leadership trait sometimes. All right. Well, this has been awesome. Again, Bernie, thanks so much for being here with us today. That wraps up today's episode. Thanks for listening. I hope you are feeling inspired to take bold action. And if this episode resonated with you, of course, as always, give it a review, share it with a friend or colleague who might benefit as well, and stay tuned for more, because more awesomeness is coming next week. Until next time, keep leading with intention. Thank you for tuning in to Rise to Lead. Keep shining your light, standing up for what's right, and inspiring others to step into their brilliance. If you liked this episode, please give it a 5-star rating and subscribe to the Rise to Lead podcast on your preferred podcast app. Until next time, it's Regina Huber, and in the meantime, remember to rise to lead.